Ryan Miller, Jordan Price, and Daniel Harris were names unknown to the public, yet behind closed doors they controlled one of the UK's most profitable drug empires. For 5 years, their network moved millions in cocaine and MDMA, hidden behind fake businesses and encrypted phones. But their 25 million empire didn't collapse from police raids or rival gangs. It ended because of one reckless video, filmed by a man who couldn't resist showing off his wealth to the world. For nearly 5 years, an underground drug network grew silently across the United Kingdom, weaving its influence through major cities and small towns alike. It was not the kind of empire that made itself known with gunfights in the streets or flashy gang signs. Instead, it thrived in silence, hidden in plain sight. At its core were a handful of ambitious young men who appeared, at least to neighbors and acquaintances, as ordinary members of the community. They rented modest flats, drove second-hand cars, and kept a low profile. To outsiders, they blended into the background. Yet behind this facade they were running one of the most profitable criminal operations in the country. The empire's true strength lay in its invisibility. While smaller crews made noise and attracted police attention, this organization did the opposite. Their shipments arrived hidden within ordinary packages, mixed into delivery boxes, and passed off as harmless household goods. A courier might think they were transporting computer parts or boxes of sweets, never realizing they were carrying thousands of pounds worth of cocaine or MDMA. The drugs were carefully wrapped, vacuum sealed to avoid detection, and moved swiftly from one point to another. There were no messy street deals. Everything was ordered, discreet, and professional. The money flowed in just as quietly. Rather than flaunt their earnings, the men built an intricate web of shell companies. Small car dealerships, cash-only barbershops, and corner cafes all served as filters for the millions that passed through their hands. Authorities suspected something bigger was happening, but could never quite pin it down. Local police noticed spikes in drug use and strange movements of cash, but the evidence always seemed too thin. The empire operated like smoke, visible in its effects yet impossible to hold. Detectives watched, informants whispered, and small dealers were occasionally caught. But the higher levels remained untouchable. The leaders avoided violence, avoided the spotlight, and ensured their names stayed clear of any charges. At its height, the operation was estimated to be worth £25 million. The men behind it enjoyed luxuries quietly, private parties in rented countryside mansions, foreign holidays paid in cash, and investments in property under false names. Their confidence grew with every successful deal. They believed they had mastered the art of disappearing within society, and in many ways they had. Years passed without a single major setback. Rivals were jealous, police were frustrated, and the empire only expanded further. What no one knew, however, was that their downfall would not come from undercover officers or secret surveillance. It would come from within, sparked by a single reckless act of arrogance. The empire was flawless on the surface, but its future rested on the discipline of its members, and discipline, as the world would soon see, was the one thing they could not all maintain. Every empire has its foundation, and for this network, perfection was the cornerstone. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed with caution, and every risk managed with precision. The men behind the operation believed themselves to be smarter than the authorities, and for years, that belief seemed to hold true. Their organization did not function like a loose gang of street dealers. It operated with the efficiency of a corporation. Roles were assigned with care. Some handled procurement, others focused on logistics, while a trusted few managed the flow of money. No one person knew the entire operation, and that separation kept the core leaders safe. At the center of their strategy was technology. The group communicated only through encrypted messaging apps, using burner phones that were discarded after a few weeks of use. Conversations were coded, filled with phrases that meant nothing to outsiders. To discuss large shipments, they used harmless words like pizza or jackets, ensuring that even if a message was intercepted, it appeared meaningless. Their network of couriers never dealt with the leaders directly. They were passed instructions anonymously, often delivered through middlemen who themselves were kept in the dark about the bigger picture. This structure created layers of protection, insulating the true architects of the empire from the everyday risks of their trade. Distribution was equally meticulous. The drugs were not sold on street corners, where danger and detection were high. Instead, orders were placed discreetly, often through social media accounts, hidden behind fake identities or through private messaging boards, only accessible by trusted clients. Customers were vetted carefully. No one new was allowed in without sponsorship from an existing buyer. This careful screening reduced the risk of undercover officers infiltrating their client base. Deliveries were made swiftly, disguised within takeaway bags, courier parcels, or sometimes hidden in the compartments of bicycles. Each drop-off looked like a harmless exchange, unnoticed by the public. The money side was even more sophisticated. Cash flowed into the empire in small amounts at first, then grew into millions. To disguise it, the group leaned on businesses that could naturally justify heavy cash turnover. A car wash, on the outskirts of town, became one of their most valuable tools, cycling thousands of pounds a week through its tills without raising suspicion. A handful of fast food shops reported bustling trade, though many of their customers never existed. It was the perfect camouflage. Accountants were even hired, unknowingly handling funds that came from illegal trade, crafting paperwork that satisfied tax officials and kept investigators away. Despite the vast sums of money and the growing size of their empire, the leaders insisted on living modestly in public. Expensive cars were registered under relatives' names. Designer clothes were reserved for private parties. They understood that greed on display was the downfall of many before them, so they kept their heads low and let their businesses speak for them. Their ability to remain invisible made them appear untouchable. Law enforcement agencies tried repeatedly to trace the threads of this empire, but every lead ended in frustration. Informants could only provide small details, none of which connected directly to the top. Surveillance revealed faces but no names, movements but no proof. The empire seemed like a ghost. Its effects were seen everywhere, but its hands could not be caught. For investigators, it was like chasing shadows. For the men running it, it was confirmation that their system was flawless. They believed they had created something too well structured, too disciplined, to ever fall. What they did not realize was that perfection can only hold as long as every player obeys the rules, and not everyone was willing to stay hidden forever. For all the discipline and control that defined the empire, cracks began to show when pride and temptation entered the picture. Among the group, there was one figure who stood out. Unlike the others, he was restless, drawn not only to the money but to the image it created. While most of the network valued silence, he craved recognition. He watched others online flaunt their wealth, gaining thousands of followers, and wondered why he, with far greater riches, should remain invisible. In his mind, hiding felt like wasting the rewards of his success. At first, his indulgences were subtle. A new watch here, a flashy jacket there, all explained away as gifts or lucky purchases. Friends began to notice the change, but few questioned him directly. On social media, however, his behavior grew bolder. He started posting photographs of expensive meals, luxury cars in the background, and holidays that didn't fit the profile of someone without a steady career. He was careful not to show anything overtly incriminating, but the pieces of his life no longer matched. To strangers, he looked like another influencer chasing status. To those who knew him personally, the transformation was harder to ignore. The thrill of attention quickly became addictive. Each post brought likes, comments, and new followers. The digital applause gave him something the empire never could: a sense of fame. For him, the quiet wealth hidden behind shell companies wasn't enough. He wanted people to notice, to admire, and to envy. Soon, his online presence became a performance. He posed in designer clothes, filmed himself stepping out of borrowed cars, and showcased champagne bottles at private parties. Each video hinted at a life beyond his means, and while he believed he was careful, the truth was that he was leaving behind a trail of clues. The leaders of the empire noticed his behavior, but they underestimated the danger. They assumed his vanity was harmless, a distraction that would fade with time. To them, exposure only came from violence or betrayal, not from a camera. They failed to realize how much information can be captured in a single careless frame. While the rest of the group continued to operate like ghosts, he became the shining light, drawing attention that no one wanted. Meanwhile, outside the empire, rivals and strangers took note. Some mocked his attempts at showing off. Others grew jealous, and whispers began to circulate. How could someone with no real job live this way? How could a man barely in his 20s afford the kind of lifestyle he displayed online? Each new upload made him more memorable, and that recognition, while thrilling for him, chipped away at the safety the empire had built for years. His addiction to fame was not about money, but about validation. He wanted to be seen, to be admired, and to be envied, even if it meant risking everything. The empire had thrived on invisibility, but now, through one man's hunger for attention, its first true weakness had been exposed. What none of them knew was that a single video was all it would take to turn years of caution into a story of downfall. The moment that would seal the empire's fate arrived one ordinary night. Sitting in a dimly lit flat, the restless member who craved recognition decided to record a video that would outshine everything he had posted before. He wanted to prove to his growing audience that his lifestyle was not just smoke and mirrors. In his mind, this video would be the ultimate display of power, wealth, and success. He positioned his phone carefully, stacked bundles of cash on a table, and scattered luxury items around to set the scene. What he didn't realize was that in his pursuit of attention, he was about to leave behind more evidence than investigators had gathered in years. The video began with him boasting silently through visuals. Thick stacks of 50p notes neatly piled in rows, gold watches glinting under the light, and bottles of expensive alcohol lined up as trophies. But what truly betrayed him were the small, seemingly insignificant details in the background. A bag of white powder, carelessly left half-sealed, rested on the edge of the table. A delivery box with a shipping label sat behind the chair, partially visible. For his followers, these details were simply part of the atmosphere of excess. For anyone trained to look deeper, they were explosive. He uploaded the video late at night, expecting it to catch fire on social media by morning. Within hours, his gamble paid off in the worst way. The clip was shared, reshared, and discussed across platforms. Some praised his boldness, others mocked him as reckless, but all the while, the numbers grew. Thousands watched what he had recorded in secrecy, never realizing that among those viewers were people far more dangerous than critics or admirers. Detectives, already hunting for any crack in the empire's facade, now had exactly what they needed. The video reached law enforcement faster than he could have imagined. Officers in cybercrime units flagged the clip almost immediately, recognizing the unmistakable signs of illicit wealth. They slowed the footage, paused frames, and enhanced the background. The bag of powder was undeniable, and the shipping label, though blurred, contained just enough of an address to spark a lid. Even the reflections in a shiny watch offered hints about the room it had been filmed in. Every second of the recording became a map, every careless inclusion a breadcrumb leading investigators closer to the empire's hidden heart. Meanwhile, the member who posted it basked in the fleeting glow of internet fame. He scrolled through comments, thrilled by the attention, completely unaware that he had just triggered a chain reaction that could not be stopped. His followers saw only the surface, the money, the luxury, the confidence. None of them realized they were watching the undoing of a multi-million-pound empire in real time. For years, the operation had survived by remaining invisible, by blending into the shadows. Now, in less than 3 minutes of footage, the empire had been dragged into the spotlight. The video that was meant to elevate one man's status had instead signed the death warrant of an organization worth £25 million. What had taken years to build was about to unravel, not from rival gangs or sudden violence, but from one reckless moment recorded on a phone. Detectives had been chasing shadows for years, but the video changed everything. What once seemed untouchable was suddenly vulnerable, and investigators wasted no time exploiting the mistake. The clip was sent to multiple specialist units, each tasked with analyzing a different detail. Cybercrime experts dissected the digital file, tracing its origin, while forensic image analysts enhanced the frames one by one. Every pause, every blur, every reflection held potential evidence. What looked like meaningless clutter to ordinary viewers became a treasure trove of clues for law enforcement. The first breakthrough came from the delivery box glimpsed in the corner of the frame. Though partially hidden, fragments of a barcode and part of an address were visible. Using software designed to reconstruct incomplete images, investigators managed to rebuild enough of the label to identify a courier company and a delivery route. This tiny detail provided a geographical starting point, narrowing their search to a handful of addresses. What had once seemed like a needle in a haystack suddenly felt within reach. Meanwhile, financial investigators began cross-referencing the luxurious items flaunted in the video with recent purchases flagged by banking systems. They identified a pattern of cash transactions consistent with laundering methods already suspected in other operations. The appearance of certain high-value watches and alcohol brands provided more than just proof of wealth. They offered leads on suppliers, some of whom had unknowingly served as links between the empire and the legitimate economy. Surveillance teams were deployed almost immediately. Plainclothes officers tracked delivery vans suspected of being connected to the group. Cameras were hidden near key addresses, and vehicles entering and leaving were logged. Within days, investigators confirmed what they had long suspected. This was not a small-scale operation but a coordinated network spread across several cities. Each surveillance report added another piece to the puzzle, painting a clearer picture of how drugs were moved, stored, and distributed. Phone data provided the next crucial connection. Detectives obtained warrants to monitor certain numbers tied to the courier routes, and soon patterns began to emerge. Calls were short, often coded, but their frequency around major deliveries revealed timing and coordination. The empire's reliance on burner phones slowed progress, yet even discarded devices left behind digital traces. With each recovery, investigators were able to piece together more of the structure. What made this stage of the investigation so effective was the domino effect, triggered by the video. One mistake led to one clue, which led to another, until the empire that had seemed invisible was now under a microscope. Detectives who had once struggled to find direction were suddenly overwhelmed with leads. They knew they had to move carefully. Too much pressure too soon could cause the group to scatter, but momentum was on their side. The member who had posted the video remained oblivious to the storm he had unleashed. As he basked in online attention, law enforcement agencies quietly closed in, mapping every corner of the empire. For the first time in years, investigators felt victory was possible. The empire's strength had always been its secrecy, but that secrecy was shattered, and now every move was being watched. What began as one reckless upload was becoming the foundation of a case that would bring down a $25 million operation. Once detectives had a clear starting point, the empire began to unravel at a speed that shocked even the investigators. What had taken years to build started collapsing within weeks. The first strike came quietly. Officers raided a storage unit on the outskirts of Birmingham, acting on information traced back to the shipping label in the video. Inside, they found dozens of sealed packages, all containing high-purity cocaine ready for distribution. The find alone was worth millions, and its discovery set off a chain of operations across the country. Each raid revealed more. In Manchester, authorities uncovered a warehouse disguised as a wholesale supplier, with hidden compartments filled with MDMA pills. In Liverpool, a barber shop suspected of laundering money was stripped bare, its accounts frozen and every hidden ledger seized. In London, cash counting machines, fake passports, and stacks of unwashed banknotes were pulled from apartments thought to be safe havens. The web of secrecy that had once made the empire untouchable now worked against it. Every address connected to another, every shell company linked back to the same core. The empire's hierarchy, so carefully designed to protect its leaders, was collapsing like dominoes. Lower-level couriers were the first to fall, rounded up in the initial raids. Some tried to stay loyal, but the weight of the evidence left them with little choice. Faced with long sentences, many agreed to cooperate, revealing routes, names, and drop-off points. Each confession peeled away another layer of protection from the higher ranks. Financial investigators hit just as hard as the tactical teams. Millions of pounds flowed through fake businesses, but once accounts were frozen, the cash streams dried up instantly. Cars, properties, and luxury goods were seized under proceeds of crime law. The empire's leaders watched as their safety nets vanished overnight. The money that once insulated them from danger was suddenly out of reach. Without access to their wealth, their power weakened, and paranoia spread through the group. For the public, news of the raids came in fragments. Local headlines reported drug busts, arrests, and police activity in different cities, but few realized these events were connected. Behind the scenes, however, investigators were executing one of the largest coordinated operations in recent years. Dozens of officers worked around the clock, each team focused on dismantling a piece of the puzzle until nothing remained. The leaders tried to fight back, but their options were limited. Some attempted to relocate their operations abroad, but border alerts flagged their movements. Others tried to hide cash, only to discover that banknotes marked during investigations traced directly back to them. Even encrypted communications were no longer safe. Detectives had tapped into enough devices to predict movements before they happened. The empire's once impenetrable shield had been shattered, and with every day that passed, another piece fell away. What made the collapse so devastating was its speed. For years the network had thrived on silence and invisibility, but once exposed it crumbled faster than anyone had expected. The video had not just opened a door for investigators, it had blown the entire operation wide open. In less than a month, what had been one of the most disciplined and lucrative drug empires in the United Kingdom was reduced to fragments, with its members trapped in a tightening net of law enforcement. The empire's arrogance had been its strength, but now it was the very thing tearing it apart. The morning of the coordinated arrests was unlike any other for the empire. At dawn, officers from multiple units carried out simultaneous raids across several cities. Front doors were smashed open, flash grenades were deployed, and heavily armed teams stormed into flats, warehouses, and suburban homes. The suddenness of the operation left the suspects with no time to react. Some were dragged from their beds, still half asleep. Others caught mid-call as they tried to warn associates. What had once been a tightly knit network of disciplined operators was reduced to chaos in a matter of hours. Inside interrogation rooms, the silence that once protected the group began to break. Fear replaced loyalty as suspects faced the reality of decades in prison. The first cracks appeared when lower-level members realized they were expendable to the leaders. Some chose to speak, offering details of delivery routes and stash houses in exchange for written sentences. Once the first few began to talk, the rest followed. Each confession was another weapon in the hands of detectives, peeling away the layers of secrecy the empire had built. The betrayal spread upwards. Trusted lieutenants, once sworn to secrecy, began pointing fingers at those above them. Some revealed how the money was moved. Others identified properties used to hide shipments. Every name given tightened the noose around the leaders. The empire that had once demanded loyalty above all else now crumbled from within, its members willing to sacrifice one another to save themselves. What had been a brotherhood quickly transformed into a chain of accusations and deals. Among those arrested was the man responsible for the reckless video. His downfall was immediate and brutal. Investigators confronted him with his own footage, pointing out every incriminating detail. Faced with undeniable evidence, he folded quickly, hoping his cooperation would lessen his punishment. Yet, instead of securing leniency, he became the symbol of the empire's destruction. Media outlets soon labeled him the face of the collapse. His foolish quest for attention forever tied to the downfall of a 25 million pound operation. As the dust settled, the courts prepared for a wave of trials. Prosecutors had more than enough evidence: drugs seized, money traced, confessions recorded, and digital records linking everything together. The empire that had once been valued at 25 million pounds was reduced to rubble, its leaders and foot soldiers locked behind bars, its assets seized and its reputation shattered. In courtrooms across the country, prosecutors presented a case so strong that convictions came swiftly. The leaders received decades-long sentences, their carefully crafted image of invisibility replaced by the reality of prison uniforms and iron bars. The man whose vanity had triggered the collapse was given a lengthy sentence as well. Though his name carried an extra burden, he was remembered not as a criminal mastermind but as the fool who had destroyed everything with one reckless video. The empire's downfall sent shockwaves through the underworld. Rival groups watched the case closely, astonished that such a well-structured organization had fallen to something so trivial. It wasn't a rival betrayal, a hidden informant, or a massive police operation that had exposed them. It was pride, vanity, and the hunger for recognition. The video became a cautionary tale whispered in backrooms and alleyways. Criminals, no matter how disciplined, now feared the dangers of a single careless moment recorded on a phone. For the public, the story carried a different meaning. News broadcasts replayed the video again and again, highlighting how greed and arrogance had brought down an empire. Viewers saw stacks of cash, the powder on the table, and the shipping label that had given investigators their breakthrough. To many it was both shocking and oddly satisfying. Proof that crime, no matter how carefully concealed, could unravel in the most unexpected ways. Families devastated by drug abuse found comfort in the downfall, believing it marked justice for the lives ruined by the empire's trade. The authorities hailed the operation as one of their most successful in recent memory. Millions of pounds worth of drugs were removed from circulation, dozens of criminals were sentenced, and the financial structures used to launder money were dismantled. But even as they celebrated, investigators admitted the case was unusual. Rarely did such large-scale operations collapse because of such a simple mistake. Behind the applause was a sobering truth. Had it not been for the reckless video, the empire might still have been thriving in silence. The legacy of the collapse lingered long after the trials ended. The video continued circulating online, stripped of its original context and repurposed as a symbol of arrogance leading to downfall. Young people shared it with mocking captions, while news documentaries replayed it as a warning about the risks of flaunting wealth without consequence. The empire's story was no longer one of criminal success but one of humiliation, forever tied to a single careless act of self-promotion. In the end, what destroyed the empire was not law enforcement pressure, not rivals seeking revenge, but human weakness. One man's hunger for fame outweighed years of discipline, exposing the cracks in a system that once seemed unbreakable. The fall of the 25 million drug network became a reminder that no empire, no matter how carefully built, is truly invincible. All it takes is one mistake, one moment, one video, to bring it all crashing down.